There's a big expectation in our society that we should purchase a home soon after we finish our education and we start working full time. We're bombarded with messaging that a home is a symbol of financial security and success, and that if we don't own our own home, we haven't got our life together, we're not a responsible adult, and basically our future isn't very bright. This all comes from this traditional blueprint for life that's just thrust upon us, which involves going to school and university, getting a job, buying a home, having a family, and working until our home is paid off and we can afford to retire around 40 years later. But the truth is that buying a home isn't for everyone, and there are both financial and non-financial factors that you need to think about before deciding whether buying a home is right for you. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 things that you need to know before going ahead and buying a home. The first thing is that property has huge transactional costs. It's important to realize at the outset that buying a home is a serious financial commitment which should not be taken lightly. You need to have a good understanding of your finances and your long-term financial and lifestyle goals before you dive in. This is important because there are very significant costs for getting in and out of property, which makes it very costly if you make the wrong decision or if you change your mind soon after buying a home. In Australia, where I live, you can generally expect the acquisition costs when buying a home to be around 5% of the value of the property. This includes things like stamp duty and legal fees for completing the transaction. So for a $1 million property, the acquisition cost would be around $50,000 to $60,000, which you don't ever get back. And to be clear, these acquisition costs are separate to and distinct from the deposit which you need to put down when you purchase the property. And at the other end, when you go to sell your home, real estate agents generally charge a 2 to 2.5% commission on the sale price, plus a few grand in advertising fees to sell the property for you. And on top of this, you also have legal fees for the conveyancing process. So on a $1 million property again, the sale costs would be around $30,000 to $40,000. Adding together both the acquisition and sales costs, that gives a total of around $100,000 in transactional costs on a $1 million home. For this reason, homeownership really should be a long-term investment, and you shouldn't be considering buying a home unless you're willing to hold it for at least 7 years. But more ideally, I think you should have a view of holding it for 10 to 15 years or even more. If you only hold your home for a few years and the market isn't great during that time, then there's a real risk that you might actually make a loss out of the whole process because the transaction costs might be greater than any gains in the value of the property. This also doesn't take into consideration big factors like all of the ongoing costs you would have incurred in holding the property, like mortgage repayments and maintenance, insurance, council rates, water rates. Generally speaking, the longer you hold on to your home, the greater the chance that you'll walk away with a profit when you sell. So you need to think very carefully about buying a home, and you need to see it as a long-term commitment. You can't just jump in and out of homes like you can with things like shares, because of the huge transaction costs associated with property. If you're not sure where you're going to be in a couple of years' time, or you're moving around every few years and you need more flexibility around where you're going to live, then it might not be the right time for you to buy a home. Renting might be a more suitable option for now. On the other hand, if you're looking to put down some roots and you don't see yourself moving for a long time, then buying might be the more suitable option for you. It really depends on your individual circumstances, what's going on in your life, and how you want to live your life. Number 2 is the hidden costs of home ownership. There are considerable ongoing costs of owning a home which many people don't realize. It's not just the mortgage repayments, it also includes things like maintenance, insurance, and council and water rates. And this equates to thousands of dollars every year. The biggest one here, which people commonly underestimate, is the cost of maintenance. A good rule of thumb is to allow 1.5% of the purchase price of the property for maintenance costs every year, and to increase that with inflation over time. So if your home is worth $1 million, then allow $15,000 a year for maintenance. So it's important to keep in mind that home ownership has large ongoing costs, which gives you a negative cash flow. Just make sure that you can afford the cost of holding and maintaining a home before committing to buying one, because it can be a big drain on your cash flow and your savings. The third thing to know is that buying a home is an investment, but it alone won't give you true wealth. Although you will find a lot of content out there about how a home is not an investment, I have to disagree with that one. The argument that people often make to say that your home is not an investment is that it doesn't produce any income and that all it's good for is to provide you with somewhere to live. Some of these people even go on to say that your home is actually a liability because it costs you money to maintain and pay off the mortgage, which gives you an overall negative cash flow. While it's true that a home produces a negative cash flow, I still definitely consider it to be an investment for the important reason that it's a substantial asset which can be expected to increase in value over time for you, assuming you have purchased in a reasonably sensible location. So some people would then ask, well, so what? Why does it matter if it goes up in value if you're living in it? You can't realize the gains if you're living in it. But the fact is that you can realize the capital growth of your home without selling it. You see, as your home grows in value and you pay down the mortgage over time, you build equity in your home, which you can then draw on to make other investments like purchasing an investment property. A lot of people are sitting on a stack of equity in their homes, which they could use to go and purchase investment properties. But most people don't educate themselves about what's possible, and so they don't even realize this is an option. And they end up having their home as their only real asset. They're sitting on a gold mine, but they don't even know it. Alternatively, you can still realize the gains in the value of your home while still having somewhere to live by simply selling your home and downsizing to a smaller, less expensive home which is more suited to your needs, and then use the leftover profits for your retirement. This is a common strategy used by the older generations of today to set up their retirement. You can also sell your home to upgrade to a better home until you eventually want to downsize. So I don't think people like Robert Kiyosaki and Grant Cardone can maintain their argument that your home's a terrible investment and a liability in the face of the simple facts that for most people, their home is their biggest investment by far, and that home ownership is the cornerstone of household wealth in many countries. In other words, for people who only purchase a home in their lifetime and don't do any other kind of investing, they are definitely going to be better off having bought a home and paid it off over the years instead of having done nothing and just renting for all those years. At least they have a big asset to show for it. So I believe home ownership is a good investment. But for me, it needs to be long term. This is because you have to hold onto your home for long enough for compounding to increase its value in a meaningful way. It's not something you can really do for a few years here and there and expect any real profits. And as I said earlier, you can't trade properties as frequently as you can trade shares because of the massive transaction costs involved. But in saying this, home ownership alone doesn't build you true wealth. For true wealth, you need to acquire multiple assets which both appreciate in value and give you passive income that you can live off. For example, investment properties which pay rental income and share portfolios which pay dividends are options that are available to you. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with buying yourself a home, but you need to be looking at investing in income producing assets as well so that you can build yourself a passive income. Your home won't ever do this for you, and maybe if you're able to build enough passive income, you won't have to sell your home and downsize in order to fund your retirement. Number 4 is that buying a home is not always better than renting. The traditional wisdom we often hear is that rent money is dead money because we could be paying off our own mortgage instead of someone else's mortgage. However, when you hear people say this, they're only really comparing the mortgage repayments of owning a home against the cost of rent. They're not taking into account all of the other ongoing costs of owning a home, which you don't incur when you rent. For example, when renting, you don't have to pay for maintenance when things break. You also don't have to worry about paying rates and building insurance. That's all the landlord's problem. So renting can be a lot better for you from a cash flow perspective. The question you really need to ask yourself is whether there's a more productive way to use your money other than buying a home. So what's the opportunity cost of sinking your savings and your cash flow into a home? If you're able to put your money to better use, then renting is not a waste of money at all. This could be through things like investing in shares or investment properties or your own business. For me personally, I don't have my own home, but I instead invest my money in investment properties. I started doing this when I was about 26 years old because I knew I wanted to get into the property market, but I wasn't ready to buy my own home because I was single and I had no real plans of settling down with someone anytime soon. So I didn't see the need to buy a big 4-bedroom house somewhere when it was just me. And because I live in Sydney, where we have some of the most expensive housing in the entire world, all I could really afford was places that would be over an hour away from where I worked in the city. So I didn't want to live a lifestyle of commuting a few hours a day to live in some house I didn't want that was in some area that I didn't like. It didn't make any sense for me to do that. So I instead turned to a strategy called rent vesting, which is just where you rent in locations where you want to live but can't afford to buy, while at the same time buying investment properties in places that you can afford and where you'll also get a good return on investment. This is a great wealth building strategy, and it can be much more effective for building wealth than buying your own home first, even though it involves you paying rent. This is because if you do it properly, rent vesting has less of a strain on your cash flow because renting is generally cheaper than owning your own home, and because an investment property gets tax benefits and rental income, which helps you in paying the mortgage against it. The stronger cash flow then allows you to borrow more money to buy more investment properties to build your wealth faster. This strategy has worked really well for me in building my wealth, and I'm comfortable to just buy my own home when I'm ready. So if you are renting, you don't need to feel like you're wasting your money or not going anywhere financially. Buying your own home is not always better than renting. It all depends on your circumstances and how you want to live. Some people can't stand the thought of renting because they want to own the four walls around them and they want to be able to do what they like with the place without answering to a landlord. They also don't want to worry about having to move every couple of years, which can be especially difficult if you have young kids and you need to stay in the same area for their school or whatever. On the other hand, some people can't stand the idea of being tied down by a mortgage and living in one place for ages. They want the flexibility and the convenience that comes from renting. So there are both financial and emotional factors at play here, which need to be taken into account in what you choose to do. Just know that if you buy your own home first, you might need to wait some time until you can afford to start buying investment properties. And if you choose to buy investment properties first, you need to be careful about taking on too much debt if you also plan to buy your own home one day down the track. And you need to be prepared to wait a while until you can afford your own place. Unless you have an incredible income, you can't usually do both in quick succession. Number 5, you don't necessarily need a home. It's important to recognize that home ownership is really just a cultural ideal. It's a construct of society. Here in Australia, there's an Australian dream of home ownership and the lifestyle of living in a detached house in the suburbs with a nice backyard. It's very similar to the Great American Dream. This concept is very closely linked to ideas of prosperity, stability, and personal success. And conveniently, this blueprint for life, which is laid out for us, is a wonderful way for a government to run an economy. Because if people buy into this dream, they will purchase their own home and then work most of their lives paying it off. So they spend most of their life working to pay the government taxes and to pay interest to the banks. And they don't really invest elsewhere to allow themselves to achieve financial freedom and retire early. So the economy basically functions around this dream of home ownership. For people who don't resonate with the dream of home ownership, it can be one big trap. They can feel pressured to do it anyway because it's what others expect of them and because we're often made to feel like failures if we don't have our own home. If this is you and you want to do something different with your life, you're free to redefine this dream and come up with your own idea of success. The truth is that you don't ever actually have to buy a home. The obvious risk with this though is that when you retire and you don't own your own home, you're going to need to be able to afford to rent a place to live until you die. In order to afford this, you basically need to have built a good enough nest egg and have a reliable passive income from your investments that can pay for your rent and your other lifestyle costs. How much you need really depends on the kind of lifestyle that you want to live. A good rule of thumb is to work out how much it would cost you each year to live the life that you want to lead, and then multiply that amount by 25. So if you think you would need $100,000 a year, then you would need about $2.5 million in income producing assets owned debt-free to pay for that lifestyle. This assumes that you would be getting a 4% return on those investments every year. It's also important to work out when you're going to retire and adjust these figures for inflation because $100,000 today won't go very far in 20 years' time. So if you're someone like me, you could rentvest your entire life, build up a portfolio of investment properties which reliably pay you a couple of $100,000 a year in rental income, and never worrying about buying and paying off your own home. I might still want my own home one day, but it's a good feeling to know that I won't need one if I choose not to go down that path. If you're able to get yourself into this kind of position and you simply opt out of needing to have your own home, it can be a very liberating thing, and it can potentially take decades off your working life. Again though, it's all a matter of what you want. Well, that'll do us for today, guys. Hopefully I've been able to give you a few things to think about before jumping into buying your own home. And just remember, the purpose of this video hasn't been to try to encourage you or discourage you from buying your own home. It's really just to make sure that you're making the right decision for yourself. And if you enjoyed the video, you might want to consider subscribing to the channel and checking out this video on your screen right now about how your net worth explodes after the first 100K. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.